also via Skype is asking, does that include relocation and things? The answer, I believe, is yes.
Yeah.
There will be support in terms of helping you relocate, finding accommodation.
And that's the same for the incubation scheme as well. If people are moving to take part in an incubator, it's the same basic principle.
Someone's asking about the incubator scheme itself. How many people are in an incubator team?
So,
sorry, that's from Ed via Skype again.
Okay. The incubator scheme that we're currently running is based on my previous kind of 5-6 years experience of developing small companies. It's not a numbers game, it's about quality. So if we have a group of students who meet all those quality criteria and we can put together a small team, technically it's slightly irrelevant whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5. It's more about what does the game require that they're going to work on, and then do all those people meet the highest kind of quality standards. Typically it's going to be between, I think 2 would be the bottom limit, and then 5 I think would be the outer limit.
Hopefully that gives Ed the answer. So between 2 and 5 people would form an incubator.
Dependent on what the actual project needs were.
Who gets to select them? Another question we've had. This is coming from the forum and via Student World. How do we select the students, and who is part of that selection process? Is it Train2Game personnel? Is it the studio personnel, or is it a combination of both?
The system currently is that there are probably 6 or 7 people that need to have some involvement at some point. So we need to get different kinds of assessments done on students. So I'm not an academic, you know, I don't deal with the academic side of this, so I need to get a reference, an academic reference for each student that we look at. That comes from the Train2Game staff, the tutors, and everybody that support the student. So, you know, we get that kind of assessment done. From my own personal point of view, I'm probably looking at it from a more of a maturity, kind of capability, capacity, raw building block, skill kind of angle. So, you know, I'm looking at people I think have got the other skills required outside of the academic ones. And then, it's, you know, there's got to be some kind of very careful assessment of things like portfolio work, which some of the DR Studios team are involved with. So, I mean, each student probably gets scrutiny in different areas from 4 or 5 different people.
And then, of course, the studio that they're going to be placed with is going to have their own assessment once we've filtered their portfolio work down to a point where they can say, this is what I need, these 3 people meet that criteria, and they're not looking just at ability, they're looking at skill set matching to what the project needs are.
The Inimitable Shadows is obviously typing away like mad on his keyboard. He's come back to another question asking about teams that are already formed. He's saying, so if you have a team that's already formed, is that a head start? Does that work? Will that help within the incubator scheme? Yeah,
it could be a head start. I mean, we need to see how they function as a unit and make sure that everybody is fulfilling a role that's necessary and all doing it on the, you know, the right quality threshold. I've got to keep coming back to this issue of quality. You know, we need to launch commercial products, so everything must meet at a commercial quality. You know, we've got a couple of groups that were already formed before we announced the incubator scheme. They're kind of, you know, ploughing a furrow towards meeting the criteria that we need. You know, I'm not interested in breaking a team up. I'm not interested in adding to it. If that team can display everything that we need, you know, fantastic.
I just think it depends on what the desired outcome of that being placed as a team is for that team.
Yeah.
If they're hoping to take their game design, go into a studio and deliver it as the new game for that studio, that's going to be quite difficult to achieve.
Well, I'd say probably impossible.
Yes, exactly. If they're happy to go in as guys who get on well and work together and will fit in within the studio's bigger reason for what it wants as a small team within a bigger team, that could work because it does close down some communication channels.
So, I mean, the way that I see it working, and this is just my personal opinion, and it'll absolutely be different per incubator in each of the development studios, but I think the first little part that the first stage of what they're doing when they enter a studio is they're going to be doing a lot of assets, a lot of work with the studio staff in return for that mentoring, that business support. As they move through the development cycle, they'll start moving more and more into critical path stuff. moving into their own project as the mentoring is taken away from a technical point of view and more into a business point of view, a business area, and then finally towards the end they will be working on either their own project or a project that they will run as a team. But it's definitely going to be a multi-stage depending on what they're delivering.
I've got a great question actually from Robin, again via Skype. Robin's saying, if a student is involved on a work placement program with a particular project, and that project ships and then becomes successful, does the student receive any remuneration outside of the student placement remuneration, i.e. some kind of royalty?
Well, it's an interesting question. What do they think they're getting the standard placement money for?
Exactly.
In the first place, you know? Yeah. I would have thought the answer is extremely unlikely.
Yeah.
You know, you'd only have to have conversations with different staff in various studios who are not students, it's their full-time job. And they still struggle to get that in some places. You can get exceptions, but it's unlikely to happen at student level.
Yeah.
However, in the long term, I don't think it's bad for people to push and think like this. So I appreciate the mentality. It's just maybe a bit too early in your career to be realistically expecting
I totally agree. Most development studios don't offer the bonus, the royalty incentive scheme to all of their staff. So it's certainly not going into the students. The value to the student is not thinking about what are my royalties are going to be here. They're thinking about getting that live project, successful project that they worked on their CVs, on their portfolio, together with all the skill sets that they've gleaned from the studio themselves. I'm
going to go slightly off topic here. I've got a great question from Helen Langfield-Smith. I think this is probably one for John. When you started out, what was the biggest challenge for you, and what are the differences now between software today and the industry some time ago when you started?
The biggest difference in the past was that there wasn't so much of a challenge. I mean, I worked with a partner, there was two of us. He did the programming, I did all the graphics, and between us we designed the game. And we learned the business and made tons of mistakes as we went on, as I'm sure we all did. But our challenge was simply identifying the right publishers to go and see. I mean, to give you an example, the first game we did as independent people, we took up to Ocean Software, who were the biggest publisher at the time. We got it signed up. Yeah, Gary and John Woods and stuff. We got it signed up the day we went up there on our first day in business. So the answer was it was very easy. And now you've got all the hoops to jump through. You know, you're not talking to John Woods, who was the big guy at Ocean in those days, and ate us for breakfast. In terms of the contract, I'm sure what he did. But getting that lucky break is the key for any development team. And now that the difficulty is getting noticed, is getting it so people actually look at your product, don't just put it on the shelf of other stuff that they're not going to have time to look at. So I think that's the biggest challenge now, is how to get noticed. And the answer is, make great quality product. Your product is what speaks for you. Everyone forgets there's all this stuff about you've got these grades, or on paper you're got this, you've got all these contacts. The product is what speaks. And any decent publisher or any decent developer who's in the business who might want to work with you, that won't go unnoticed. We look for quality. That's what we've been trained to do. So just make good quality stuff. In
a kind of more Yoda-like sense, I think when we started, the industry was kind of content hungry. So literally, pretty much anything that appeared would sell something. Now, the fundamental thing for me is that students need to quickly learn the difference between a good game and a commercial one. Thousands of good games every year, nice art, good programming, well executed, you know, interesting in some aspect or another, that sell nothing. You know, we've got such a kind of polarized market where we've got 10% of the product picking up 90% of the revenue. Students must learn to focus on commerciality.
I've got a perfect segue here as well. So Lee Davis asks, as part of an incubator scheme, when would it be likely that an incubator team would start to work on original IP? And that really, I think, talks to the point that you're making there.
Yeah. Okay, so at the risk of upsetting everybody with this, the kind of collective brains that I've worked with over the last 6 or 7 years on small business development will tell you that it's going to be some time, frankly. I think in the context of the gaming incubators, we're probably going to see teams go maybe 2 or 3 or even possibly 4 small product cycles before somebody's going to give them that opportunity.
Can I add some extra addition to this? You know, I've been kicking around 25 years. I've had 10 #1 games that I've designed. To put this in perspective, I've not been able to sell an original game for the last 15 years. I'm having to publish my own to get it out there. So it gives you some idea of where we are in this original
that's a very
versus
sobering
commercial
point for people.
Yeah.
Everyone, I think, wants to make original IP, but John is saying it's tough.
It changed in the mid-90s. We got very much more commercial. All of us have worked on a lot of licensed product recently because that's where we get to get the jobs easily. You can do original games, but they're very hard to do because you're sandwiched between licenses, big sequels of big existing games like your never-ending Call of Duties and Final Fantasies and stuff. And by the time you've taken those out of the equation, there's not a lot left. I mean, you get your original games, and then you've got first-party games like from Nintendo and the likes.
But I think the other thing there is that students need to understand the connectivity to retail. So retail has an ever-decreasing amount of shelf space. So when faced with the prospect of stocking FIFA or a game they've never heard of, you know where that decision's going, right? There's very, very limited space at retail for something that the retailer cannot reasonably predict.
I might also...
Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, an iPhone and an iPad and some of the browser platforms and the smaller platforms, there are real opportunities for people to develop their own games. However, when you go into a studio as an incubator for placement, that won't be the studio's priority. Your IP won't be their priority. You should learn your skills from them, then apply it to your own games, and then do it on a small platform like iPhone.
Tony, you've worked on Metal Gear Solid, you've worked on Pro Evo Soccer, and you've worked on some original titles. What were the easier titles to work on in terms of getting into market, getting that support?
It's exactly as Dave and John have just said. The market has changed over the last 10, 15 years, where before it was relatively easy to get exposure to the public. Now you have to actually buy shelf space to get it in front of the public. You pay the retailers to get your game on their shelf. You're historically spending about 100%, maybe even 150% sometimes of the development costs again on marketing and PR just to get it out there, and it's all about risk management. Why would the publisher or the developer risk developing that IP when they could develop a lower one for a smaller margin? It's not about the cost of your development, it's not that the fact that they don't think you can make a great game, it's will that great game get in front of the public? And therefore, yes, there is an opportunity to get new IPs out there, but you have to prove your commercial value first. It's the same as if you're a film producer. If you're a film director. If you're a film director, you're much more likely to be given a carte blanche to do what you want with the IP if you've got 6 blockbusters behind you. It's exactly the same for a development team or an incubator. Once you have proven that your ability to develop a commercial game that is successful, people are then going to say they know how to develop a game. Until then, they're going to ask you to develop things that they can sell.
So I think it's fair to say that the original IP versus licensed and sequel games will rage on as a debate.